Hello and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the important topics from the international edition of the Hindu newspaper and analyze them for your relevance for the examination. Also, take a look at how do you write answers and what are the areas important for your prelims and mains exam. Now, before we proceed, I do understand that today the Hindu analysis was supposed to be taken early in the morning itself by Astha ma'am. But then, owing to certain medical emergencies at her place, she could not take that. Now, rather than canceling the entire newspaper analysis, we don't want the students to suffer. So, even though the session is delayed, this brings for you the encapsulation of today's newspaper so that you also have a kind of a continuity and you can be up to date with the current affairs and the newspaper analysis. Now, having said that, today, the Conquer Prelim session, which was scheduled for 7 p.m. Now that is something which will be carried on from 8:15 p.m. So do attend the Conquer Prelim session after this, and that will be held live as well. Now, taking a look at the topics that we are going to have a discussion for today. So, today in total, we are going to have a discussion for 8 different topics in varying depths. So, first of all, delimitation after 2027, rebuilding power in India. Now, this is an editorial piece relevant for your GS paper 2. It talks about the aspect of delimitation, how that process will be carried on, and what are the challenges which are emerging, and what should be the way forward. So, this is relevant, very important for your GS paper too, and it is a part of the ongoing discussion for the past year and a half almost since the census exercise has been delayed to 2027. Now, India and the EU, a fit partnership in a divided world. Now, this is relevant for your GS paper too, the IR portion. And India EU will upgrade ties. Now, this has basically appeared in the foreign policy section of the newspaper, the international affairs section. So, we will combine both these articles and then address them together, relevant for your GS paper too. Right to dignity for the ASHA workers. Now, ASHA workers are facing a challenge in terms of the payment that is being curtailed. Now, there is large amount of protests which are taking place in the region of West Bengal. So, what is that protest about? This is something which can be relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your GS paper 3. Then, US armada headed towards the Gulf. Now, Donald Trump has basically said that his actions on Iran is still uncertain and there can be an impending action going ahead into the future. Now, this is a story which is going to be built up. So, this is again vital for your GS paper too. Ambitious scheme to spur next generation battery manufacturing in India experiences a hurdle and a bottleneck in the offing from the Chinese. Now, we will take a look at what this PLI scheme was about, the ACC PLI scheme, about the chemical cells, and what are the provisions. And then we will take a look at the overall challenges which are confronted. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Now, the states have been asked by the union government to diversify the fish market and also the fish produce that they are generating. Now, that is something we will discuss briefly for the prelims perspective. And again, the Granth Kutir in Rashtrapati Bhavan has been inaugurated by the president. So, that again becomes relevant for your prelims preparation. Now, before we jump into the first topic and discuss the first topic in detail, an announcement for all the aspirants who are preparing for civil services. The platinum badge starts on 28th of January. And here we are basically starting with environment and ecology in this particular case. Now, platinum does hold certain amount of qualities and some differentiating factors from the remaining mode of and the rest of the mode of online communication and online education. Here, accountability and discipline is the key factor which does ensure that your possibility to succeed is much higher. We do ensure that mentorship is done, the guidance is done by the faculty members themselves, so that the students are on tune with what to study and what not to study. It is not the case of any other online course where after the class the students are left on their own. So do attend the experience session of the Platinum and do take a look at what this batch offers for you. Now, coming to the first topic of the day, and that is delimitation after 2027, redrawing power in India. Now, this is a very detailed, comprehensive article written by the former Chief Election Commissioner of India, the S.Y. Qureshi. Now, he talks about the fact that census which is going to be carried out in 2027. Now, what is census, by the way? Census is the periodic counting of the population. What is the population of any of our country? Now that is something which we do every decade for the past century, and so we have been doing it every decade. So the last census exercise was held in 2011, prior to that in 2001, 1991, 1981, and so on. Now, these census exercises give you an idea about the population, the demography, the kind of various constitution or components of the population, every detail you get every 10 years. Now, it is closely linked with delimitation. Now, what do we understand by delimitation? Delimitation, absolutely in literary terms, it actually means or refers to the periodic redrawing of electoral boundaries to reflect the population changes which have been happening. That is a delimitation exercise. Now, this delimitation is done by the Delimitation Commission of India. Delimitation Commission of India. Okay. Now, what they do or what they have done periodic or historically is the case that they have taken a look at the population data, where the population is higher, where the population is lower, and accordingly redrawn the map of the constituencies. After all, you have to ensure a kind of a semblance in terms of the number of people who are electing one particular member of parliament, or even for that matter member of legislative assembly. Now, why is that important? That is important because if you want a kind of a universal and a uniform representation across the country, you can't have a situation where 100 people are electing one MP, and on the other hand 1 crore people are also being represented by one MP. So that is why this periodic delimitation exercise is done. Now, in India, the constitution mandates the delimitation after every census. Having said that, the actual redrawing of the boundaries and interstate seat redistribution has been frozen since 1976. That is, after the 1971 census. That means in India till now, you have had four delimitation commissions which have been set up. So, first delimitation commission was set up in 1952. Now, based on the 1951 census, second delimitation commission set up in 1963, conducted after the reorganization of the states. That is why this was of vital importance in order to allocate the number of seats in Lok Sabha, for example, that each of these states will have. The third delimitation commission in 1973, based on the 1971 census, and that resulted in increasing the total number of Lok Sabha seats from 522 to around 543. Then you have the fourth delimitation commission, the last one, which was set up. Now, it was set up under the Delimitation Act of 2002. So, the parliament does pass these delimitation acts. Under the provision of these delimitation acts, a delimitation commission is set up. Now, once a delimitation commission is set up, mostly headed by a Supreme Court judge or a previous Chief Justice, now in that particular case, they take a look at the census data, they take a look at the representation, and after that, they redraw the boundaries of the constituencies, or in terms of reallocating the number of seats given to any particular state. Now, once the Delimitation Commission arrives at a particular conclusion, now that is something which is binding. Now, based on the 2001 census, while boundaries were redrawn, the total number of seats was frozen and the exercise was completed in 2008. Now, the delimitation exercise has been postponed by the various different amendments till the case of the census which will be carried after 2026. Now, ideally, that means the census exercise which will be carried on in 2027, after that, a delimitation commission will be set up and a delimitation of the boundary can be carried out. So, the Delimitation Commission of India in India is a high power body whose orders have the force of law and cannot be called in question before any court. These orders come into force on a date to be specified by the President of India on this in this behalf. That is the power of Delimitation Commission. Now, the census of 2027, why that becomes important. So, as I told you, with the help of the Amendment Acts, for example, the 84th Amendment Act 2001, froze the total number of seats in the Lok Sabha and the state assemblies until and after the first census, which will be carried out or to be taken after the year 2026. Ideally, when the 84th Amendment Act was being passed, it was thought that the 2031 census, which will be carried out, after that, you can have the Delimitation Commission. But we did not have a census in 2021 owing to the COVID pandemic, and then because of the administrative and the issues by the government, it has been delayed. Now that the census exercise is going to be carried on, delimitation is supposed to happen. Now that has raised multiple anxieties and multiple different issues across the country. So, what are these issues? Let us address them. First of all, when we take a look at the entire process of delimitation, this entire process of delimitation, redrawing of the boundaries of the constituencies, now this is something which is a very tedious and a complex task. History tells us that whenever it has happened in India, it does take a minimum span of 3 to 4 years. Minimum span of 3 to 4 years. Now, the fear is that this delimitation might be carried on or started after 2027 and might be finished within 1 year in order to accommodate for the 2029 Lok Sabha polls. So, that is one of the issues where the fear is that there might be some rush or some urgency to arrive at this delimitation. And that can create anxieties across various different states. Now, also understand that when we talk about the number of seats across in the region in Lok Sabha, for example, now that has remained fixed since 1971. Now, in 1971, our population was pretty much lesser, almost one third. And that means the Lok Sabha of today, the constitution of Lok Sabha for today, that is 543 parliamentarians who are there. Now, they represent or they are ideal for representing close to around, let's suppose, much lesser amount of population, one third of the population that India has today, somewhere around 500 million, 540, 570 odd million population that India had at that point of time. Today, we have a 1.5 billion population. So, population has risen massively. So, due to this population rise, what has happened? While earlier, let's suppose a group of 20 individuals, or let's suppose 2 lakh individuals, had one parliamentarian, just as an example, who could represent the interests of the 2 lakh population. Now that number has swollen. Now that number is that one MP is accountable for, let's assume, almost by 3 times. So let's assume almost 3 to 4 times, 20 lakh people. So obviously, the interest of the population is something which is taking a backseat. Accordingly, for example, even the MP led funds, which are the developmental assistant funds given to the MP, now that is also restricted and that has to be distributed amongst the larger population. So the developmental bottlenecks also arise. So one can argue that the number of seats and the constitution of the Lok Sabha, which is there today, it doesn't represent the reality of India that we are living in. It does represent the reality which was present in 1971. So that is one of the issue. That is underrepresentation of sorts and a rising population. Other issue. Now in 1971, you had almost similar fertility rates across various parts of the country. Similar fertility rates, which would basically indicate the number of offsprings and also the overall increase in the growth rate of population. Across the country, the fertility rates were very similar. But today, if you take a look at today's India, there's a stark difference in terms of the fertility rate. For example, if you compare a Kerala with a UP, now fertility rate in certain districts and certain regions of UP, Bihar, they can be close to around 2 to 3, right? Whereas in Kerala, it is less than the replacement rate fertility. That is, it is around 1.2, 1.3. So they have a shrinking population in certain states, particularly in the southern states, whereas in states in the northern part of the country, the population has been ever expanding. Now, as a consequence of this, let's suppose after the census of 2027, if the constituencies are redrawn, then states with higher fertility rates will end up gaining disproportionately. Higher fertility rates gain more seats, right? Gain more seats. So that is a point of concern. Because if these states, they basically have, let's suppose, a UP and a Bihar, they have much greater increase in the number of seats. And if there is increase in the number of seats in Tamil Nadu and Kerala and Karnataka as well, but not in the same proportion, that means these particular states bargaining power with the central government, that tends to reduce substantially. And that is what the southern states are slightly anxious about, and rightfully so. After all, the reason that these particular states, the southern states, have been able to cap the fertility rate is because of the various different reforms in the healthcare sector, in the food nutrition sector, in the overall diagnostics aspect that has been improved over the years. And these states have done good. Now, you cannot penalize a particular state by giving them lesser number of seats just because they have done good on certain parameters. That is where it basically tantamounts to penalizing for a good behavior. That is not good. Now, having said that, that is where the other issues also arise. For example, when we talk about the overall constitution of the Lok Sabha, now there the Home Minister has publicly stated multiple times that he gave an assurance that the number of seats in the southern states will not decrease after delimitation. Even if the number of seats in the southern states increase, still after that, what is the proportionate increase in other particular states? For example, if seats are allocated purely by population in an expanded Lok Sabha, now the Lok Sabha in that case is projected to have close to around 888 seats. Now, Uttar Pradesh, the number of seats in Lok Sabha, which is around 80 right now, is going to balloon to almost 151. Bihar, which has 40 seats right now, is going to balloon to 82 seats. Combined share of UP and Bihar will be almost exceeding 26% of the House representation. Now, southern states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala would retain similar absolute numbers, right? Their numbers would also increase, but overall proportion is something which would decrease. And that is important. Because please understand, when we talk about the polity of our country, the governance of our country, you have the Lok Sabha, which is one of the major decision making bodies. Rajya Sabha also has got that power. But Rajya Sabha, again, in India's case, the upper house constitution is not the same as you observe, for example, in US. In US, regardless of the state population, the number of seats in the upper house is 2 for each and every state. Now, that means each and every state is treated as equal. Whereas in our country, that is not the case in Rajya Sabha. So different states have larger share or lesser share in Rajya Sabha. So if you lose that proportionality or that bargaining power in Lok Sabha also and in Rajya Sabha as well, that means over a period of time, it is very much a kind of an understandable situation where you feel you can be drawn to the fringes and you can be basically sidelined in terms of your demands, your asks, and so on. Now, here the article has basically suggested certain way forward. what can be done going ahead in order to solve this deadlock or the logjam. So basically, what SY Qureshi has suggested that look, carry out the census exercise, but extend the freeze in terms of the redrawing of the constituency until the fertility rates across the country converges. Now, that is a long ask, right? Already, as we have discussed, that basically the number of population or the amount of population that an MP serves, that population size is increasing, is ballooning. As a consequence, that means we are on the borderline of a kind of underrepresentation. Other suggested way forward is expand the size of the Lok Sabha, so no state loses seats. Now, here again, this is something which many of the experts have basically weighted in or have basically associated their opinion with this. But then the concerns that we have talked about with the southern states and the states with a better demographic aspect. Then, a weighted formula. What is a weighted formula? That when you redraw the constituency, you basically do not do it only on the parameters of population, just like what the finance commission does. You put certain amount of weightage to population, maybe 80%, and then almost around 20% on the other developmental indicators like health, literacy, fertility, etc. So this is going to be very similar to the financial devolution which is advised by the finance commission, right? So as just like the finance commission, so this can also be carried out. Having said that, actually arriving at this formula will be problematic, and implementing it on the ground is again going to be problematic. Then strengthen the Rajya Sabha. Now, this is very important in a country like India, which has a very strong federal character. And each of the states, they have a very distinct identity and demands and requirements as well. As a consequence of which, we do need the states to be empowered in the upper house. We can do this, that we can reorganize the Rajya Sabha with each of the states having got a similar amount of share, regardless of the population, regardless of the size. Now, it is again a Herculean and a humongous task, but at the same time, if this is done, it will again serve as a check and balance for the governance, and that will be for a better democratic and a much stronger federal setup. Now, bifurcate large states like UP into four different states. Now, this is a proposal which has been mooted for almost a couple of decades now. It has been argued that UP is so big, and if it is considered to be an individual country of its own, it would be the fifth largest country in the world, just in the size of population. So, the population is very high. So, all that population under one particular state can be difficult administratively as well. So, the suggestion that has been put forward by the article is that divide the state like UP into smaller units to reduce the dominance of one particular state in Lok Sabha. Now, other phased redistribution over two election cycles. Don't rush into redrawing the boundaries. Do it slowly and steadily over the passage of two election cycles, one phase by 2031, after that maybe by 2034, so that you have enough amount of consensus making as well, and everybody gets a chance to represent their grievances as well. So, in either of these cases, this is a measure which can be taken in order to assuage and in order to solve the anxieties which the states have. So, overall, what do you need to know for the topic? What is delimitation? Now, under the 84th Amendment Act, that delimitation exercise was pushed forward for the first census to be carried out after 2026. Now, the census exercise is strategically being carried out in 2027. Now, that is where the anxiety is, that delimitation can be a rushed affair. Now, what are the issues? Why do we need delimitation? Because periodic redrawing of the boundaries is a sign of a healthy democracy, because you need adequate number of representatives per section of population that should not balloon very large in size. At the same time, the challenges associated with the social parameters, the health indices, and the fertility rates, which can provide a discrepancy in terms of the representation. So these challenges we have discussed, and then we have also discussed the suggested way forward. Okay. So here, in this case, the practice, the question that you can solve: what is a delimitation exercise? Discuss the impact of the impending delimitation in India post 2026 and suggest a way ahead. Now, a straightforward, simple question. The intro just talk about the literal meaning of delimitation. It is the redrawing of the territorial boundaries of any particular region, right? Now, in India, it is carried out by the Delimitation Commission, which is set up after the act of a parliament. Now, because it is a 15 marker question, you also have the scope to very briefly mention in one sentence the four different delimitation commissions which have been set up, one sentence each. So that is where in the body portion you talk about brief history. Okay. Now, then after that, you talk about the case of the delimitation exercise to be carried out post 2027. Now, why it is needed? Here you talk about the population aspect and then the concerns of the particular states as well, particularly those states which have advanced in the social ladder, in the social metrics, in the family planning, in the healthcare structure. That concern you can highlight along with the projected impact that we have discussed. And then the way forward, what can be the way ahead? All these you can list one by one. So that is where you can write an answer. In the conclusion, however, you have to provide and strike a positive note where you talk about the fact that this delimitation exercise that is going to be carried out is important. However, equally important is to gain a consensus and to ensure that there are no grievances left on the table while carrying out the delimitation exercise. The developed states need to be accommodated. At the same time, stress needs to be provided for the upliftment of the laggard states as well. Like that, you can end the entire answer. Okay. Now, then coming on to the next couple of articles. Now, this is an article which has been uh, put in the editorial section, that is India and the EU, a fit partnership in a divided world. And then in the foreign policy or the international relations section of the newspaper, you have another article that is India EU will upgrade ties. Trade deal is still in the works. Now, here, this time on the Republic Day, on the eve of Republic Day, India has invited as the chief guest the members of EU. So you have the president of EU as well as the president of European Council. They are going to visit India. Now, around 48 hours remain, and basically they will be a part of one of the most imposing or one of the most grand ceremonial aspects that we have across the year. Now, India and EU, they hold a special kind of strategic convergence in today's day and age. Both of these countries, if you take a look at it, for the past few decades now, both these countries were actually trying to deepen the relationship with US. Okay. Now, both of them have been left in the lurch by none other than Mr. Trump himself. So, as a consequence, both of them are reeling under what the foreign policy should be, and they are actually thinking about what their strategic autonomy means and what should be the rebalancing act that they should be doing. Now, both of these countries or both of these regions together, Indian subcontinent and the EU, together, they represent close to around more than 1.5, around 1.7 to 2 billion of the population of the world. So it is going to create one of the largest markets, right? One of the larger markets across the world, right? So that is going to be of vital importance for trade, for various different aspects. Now, both these regions are looking at strategic rebalancing and strategic autonomy, a kind of an independence from the US dominated world. So, that is where the convergence also lies. At the same time, other than the market, the GDP, that is the not only the population, the overall GDP that they will represent will also be very, very high. So the potential is very, very great. Now, the deal is still being negotiated. There are some prickly sectors that we are going to talk about, which in the case of EU also they are slightly sensitive about. We Indians are also sensitive about that. So there, the negotiation is still being carried on. Chances are that when you will have the EU president and the EU delegation who will visit India, an announcement shall be made that negotiations have ended, but final signature won't be put on the paper just now. It will take some more time. So, what are the benefits that both these regions tend to gain? So, first of all, the large market that we have discussed. Then, when it comes to the perspective of India, India is reeling under sanctions, or in a case of extraordinary high amount of tariffs which have been imposed on India by the US. As a consequence of that, our various different sectors, such as textiles, right? Textiles, jewelry, gems and jewelry. Okay. Now, fisheries. Now, these are the sectors which are suffering. So, these sectors in India's case, they will get a larger market in EU. And as a consequence, we can improve our overall trade, and that will always be beneficial. It will create the or first of all, it will prevent the job losses at home and have the potential to create more jobs at the same time. Then here, other than that, you also have the case of machines and cars, for which EU has got a kind of a technological advantage. So there, EU seeks to have an access to the Indian market. You have the German automobile makers. You basically have the French automobile manufacturers. All of them, they do want a larger share of the Indian pie. So that is where they are actually wanting to have this deal so that they can sell their produce and they can also benefit. Mind you, any trade deal will only be successful if it is beneficial for both the countries. If it is beneficial only for India also, then also that trade deal can't survive for a long period of time. Then, other than that, in this trade deal, a very important aspect on the sidelines is also being developed. And that probably is going to be signed, finalized, and announced in the next couple of days. And that is the strategic partnership on defense. Partnership on defense. Now, this is very vital for India as well as for EU. Now, EU, mind you, previously has done this only with two countries in Asia, that is, with Japan and Korea, South Korea, obviously. So, only these two countries are there with which EU has had a strategic defense partnership. India is also where EU wants to have that strategic defense partnership. Mind you, presently in the state of flux, in the condition of that variability, EU can't rely on US anymore. EU wants to have larger strategic partnership, defense partnership for the long run future. And that is where India fits the bill. Now, how will it benefit India? So, various different armaments, defense imports, for example, that we have from the various firms. For example, we have just signed a partnership with the Italian firm for torpedoes. Then we are about to sign a partnership with Dassault for more Rafales. So, and we are about to sign partnership with Germans for submarines. So, European Union is one of those regions which can provide us with the defense equipments which can replace the Russian market and which also has the potential to offset the American suppliers. So India will get its hand on some high tech machinery. But is it the case of only imports in India? The answer is no. For the previous few years, ever since India has been trying to increase its defense exports, India has also been exporting substantial amount of goods to Europe, defense goods. Which such defense goods are there that India is exporting to Europe? So you basically have various different ammunitions, arms, rocket systems. Now, in the case of the Ukraine conflict, due to the Ukraine conflict, multiple different states, they are arming themselves. The countries are arming themselves. So that is where Indian exports have jumped substantially. So both the countries will benefit as a consequence of this strategic partnership on defense. So for India, India will tend to gain. Now, here, transfer of technology, mind you, is not a given factor. It still depends on the company with which you are signing the deal and the country whether it allows it or not. But overall, the rates, the taxes, etc., that will be much more streamlined. So, India will be able to get high tech machines or high tech equipments like submarines, right? Planes, etc. Whereas India exports large amount of ammunitions to the EU. Other than that, another aspect which is being finalized is the mobility partnership. Now, when we say mobility here, now, mobility does not mean in terms of the cars and the vehicles out there. Mobility of the labor force. So this you have various different types of labor force. You have very high skilled labor in India, some in the grade of the research scientists, very highly skilled individuals across industries, IT sector, for example. Now, Europe has a shrinking demography, a shrinking population. So that is where this Indian workforce can be an addendum and they can benefit out of it. Then you also have the mobility associated with the mid level and the low skill level individuals as well. Now, once this mobility partnership is done, it will basically provide India with a greater amount of opportunity, right? So, highly skilled individuals, right? And also cheap labor, both of them will be available. And that mobility can ensure, for example, the European researchers can also work in India, and accordingly India's R&D sector can also take a look at a brighter future. So these are the positive outcomes that you can ascribe. But then, at the same time, it is not all smooth sailing. There are a series of challenges as well. Many of our sectors, they will be under increased stress. One of the other areas, by the way, where India can benefit is the export of electronics. That is again where the European market offers a larger and a mature market for Indian electronics. But there are challenges. Amongst the major challenges is the CBAM. That is the carbon or the border adjustment mechanism. Now, this is a kind of a carbon tax, which will be imposed on any good which is imported into EU. So, for example, if let's suppose India manufactures steel, India manufactures cement and wants to export it to EU. Now, in that particular case, Indian exports will be subjected to a higher level of tariff or duty. Why is it so? You might have that question. The answer to this is simple. First of all, European Union has got very stringent environmental laws and environmental regulations which have to be fulfilled. As a consequence, the cost of manufacturing any of the product in Europe is high. Now, it is also the case that countries like India, Vietnam, China, where these environmental regulations are not that stringent, manufacturing can be done by cheaper technologies also, and the finished good is also cheaper. So, as a consequence, if India, Vietnam, Cambodia, China, Bangladesh, they start exporting these goods to Europe, that is when Europe has said we will impose a tax on you. Now, this is again a kind of a protection mechanism that Europe is imposing, but this carbon tax can be as high as almost 26% and will affect or impact sectors like steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizers, all of them. All the carbon intensive sectors, right? All of them will be impacted. So, as a consequence, this is a kind of a touchy area where India was seeking to expand its steel exports. and that is where European Union is ready with the tax. So this is one of the uh, sticky points where the negotiators are taking a lot of time. Another sticky point is the case of agriculture. Now, India is very touchy about agriculture. Obviously, if you have almost 45% plus of your population involved in agriculture, directly or indirectly, you cannot take that lightly and you cannot allow the cheap imports to flood into your market. At the same time, Europe is also extremely sensitive about agriculture. Mind you, previously, a few days ago and a few weeks ago, Europe had signed a deal with Mercosur nations in the Americas. Right. Now, that deal now is in the doldrums. It has not been implemented yet. It has been taken to the EU court for the kind of verification and judgment to be made, because it was found out that the agricultural aspects and the components of the deal were not acceptable to EU. So agriculture is another sticking point for both these nations. And for both these not both these nations, both these regions. And for European Union, another sticking point is the case of the Indian immigration and the number of immigrants. So that these are the areas where there is a kind of navigation which is being carried out, and hopefully by 27th of January there will be an announcement. Mostly what is to be expected is that the defense partnership will be announced, and it will be announced that the negotiations have been completed, but the signing in all probability will be done around a month later. Okay. Now, then the practice question: discuss the opportunities and the challenges which confronts India in the case of the EU deal. Right. Confronts India EU trade partnership. So in this case, partnership. In this case, in the intro, you start with the prospects, the possibilities of how they do represent very large economies, and they do represent higher amount of the global GDP. So all of that you address: population, GDP. Then after that, in the body portion, start with the opportunities, start segment wise, sector wise, talk about strategic autonomy to be addressed rather than strategic dependence. For that, European Union is a good choice. Then talk about the diversification of the market for exports, job generation in India. After you have done that, however, there are certain challenges also. Challenges: you have the case of barriers like CBAM that you have to mention. Agriculture is another sticking point. And then eventually, in the conclusion, you have to talk about that the trade between India and EU is something which has to be looked into, because EU represents a larger group and India is amongst the fastest rising economies of the world. Now, both these regions need to align for a multipolar world and a healthy functioning of the global geopolitical order. So, like that, you can conclude the answer. Then we come to the next article, that is right to dignity. Now, presently, the ASHA workers in West Bengal, they are undergoing protests, right? And they are demanding their wages to be increased to how much? 15,000 per month, right? That is their overall demand, that increase our salary to 15,000 per month. The government is not paying heed to this demand. Now, when we talk about ASHA workers for a long period of time have been the backbone of India's welfare schemes overall. If you consider the nutritional scheme, the case of the universal immunization program that we have, in the case of, for example, even our fight against TB, there also the frontline workers are the ASHA workers. So these ASHA workers have been at the front line for decades now when it comes to the deployment of the government schemes, the benefits on the ground level. Now, these ASHA workers are very poorly paid and they don't have much of the representation as well. For example, for gig workers, there is a lot of demand, and rightfully so, that they should be given their necessary rights. Now, this demand by these workers have been going on since the time of Indira Gandhi government itself. Gandhi government denied the status. Many of the workers, it denied the worker status to them. which basically meant that many of the services or the benefits of being a part of the government employee that is not available. Now, here, status under the Integrated Child Development Scheme is what they were asking, that was not provided. Eventually, after that, there have been multiple court cases as well. And in the court case, for example, the 1996 State of Karnataka versus Amirbi decision excluded the Anganwadi workers and the Asha workers from the government employee status. At the same time, the court judgments have basically brought about provisions for food for all, nutritional security, immunization. The government has been bringing in multiple of these programs, and that means they have a very high amount of workload, right? So they are thinly spread. The thinly spread basically means that each ASHA worker has got a very high amount of workload, but then they are not remunerated enough. So you need more ASHA workers. At the same time, you need to provide them with certain benefits so that they are also assured that they are doing, at least they should be able to run their own domestic household. After all, think about it. If these ASHA workers are not there, then your immunization program will suffer. If immunization program suffers, your demography will be exposed to multiple different vulnerabilities, diseases out there. So that again will pull our demography backward. So there are a lot of detrimental impacts. Now, over a period of time, these ASHA workers, because they have been demanding, and none of the states have, or none of the governments have done enough for them, so they formed a kind of a union. National level union was formed. Now these unions, the people in higher powers or higher ranks of the union, they got a lot of money, they got riches, but then the percolation of that welfare amongst the ASHA workers have not happened. Multiple times the state governments have provided some amount of benefits owing to the large pressure group that they create and they form in the states, but at the central level much of that financial devolution is limited. Over a period of time, as the central government has decided to invest in other central sector schemes, it has reduced the amount of investment or the money which is given to the states for the ASHA workers, and the states are not paying them. So that is why, going ahead into the future, the article argues that if anything, if we want to improve our social spectrum, ASHA workers need to be treated with respect, and minimum wage, living wage, that is something which should be provided. Now, Donald Trump likes being in news and making news headlines. So he again made a news headline that US Armada, along with the aircraft carrier group, is headed towards the Persian Gulf. And he said that an action can be taken against Iran. Mind you, a few days back, this is how the global affairs have become so unpredictable. That is why all the countries are scampering helter and skelter to find some semblance of thought. Understand this, that when we talk about the case of Iran, a few days back when US was about to launch an attack on Iran, you had multiple different leaders of the Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., who had actually called the US and requested US not to attack Iran. It would create various different issues in the region. Now, Donald Trump after that backed out. But then, after that, because in the domestic audience in US, Donald Trump is famously known as Taco. Right? Trump always chickens out, that he imposes a threat and that never materializes. Now, Donald Trump has been known to back out from the issue of Greenland, where after meeting with the NATO chief, he said that we are not going to attack Greenland. We have a long-term deal. In reality, US always had a long-term deal. So in his domestic audience over the past 24 hours, there has been a lot of clamor call that Taco returns again, that Trump has again chickened out over Greenland. Now, Trump is a very sensitive man, and as famously put, it is a case of an EQ of an 80-year-old, emotional quotient of an 80-year-old in an 80-year-old body. So as a consequence, Trump basically said that, look, in Iran, you never know, I can attack once again. Now, if that happens, now Iranians have basically said that any kind of aggression will be taken as a full scale war. And that means what Iran can do is Iran can launch attacks on the US forces. Now, the easiest or the closest of those attack points would be the base in Qatar, the Al Udaid base in Qatar, the largest US base in the region, along with Iranians possibly launching attacks on the other US bases in the region as well. So it can very easily lead to volatility. And that is something which, again, is going to build up over the coming week. Now, ambitious scheme to spur next generation battery manufacturing in India hits a hurdle. Now, what is this article about? Now, all of you would be aware about the fact that in the future, when we are going for, and in the present itself as well, as the world is transitioning towards electric mobility, electric vehicles, renewable energy, battery tech is of increased importance. Storage of energy is of increased importance. Now, India does not have that much capacity to manufacture and make those batteries. Our domestic research and development is particularly low, and also know how in terms of what is required for the battery manufacturing, that is also very low. We were dependent and we have been dependent on the Chinese imports. India wanted to and has wanted to diversify its supply chain ever since the COVID pandemic. Over dependence on China also impacts our strategic freedom and strategic autonomy. Now, that is where India had announced an ambitious ACCPLI, that is Advanced Chemistry Cell Production Linked Incentive Scheme for the battery tech. Now, this PLI scheme was basically announced way back, and that is something which is operated by Ministry of Heavy Industries. What is this scheme about? We will talk about it. I will give you the point-wise notes of that as well. But basically, it was to improve our domestic capacity and overall ensure that we are self-sufficient. Now, few years have passed. Now, the visa issues with the Chinese professionals, and also China doesn't want to give India that technology. As a consequence, India is lagging behind. Of the total goal which was set up to establish around 50 gigawatt hour of battery storage by 2026, what is it that we have managed to generate? Around 1.4 gigawatt hour. So that tells you how limited our growth has been. And this is where China is serving as a bottleneck, but this also serves you a stark reminder why we need to have our own R&D develop this battery tech at the same time. Now, what is this ACCPLI? Ministry of Heavy Industries administers 18,100 crore PLI scheme for advanced chemistry cell battery storage, aiming to establish 50 gigawatt hours of domestic manufacturing capacity to reduce import dependence. Then, launched in May 2021, the scheme incentivizes setting up of a giga-scale high-efficiency battery storage with a 2-year gestation period followed by 5-year performance period. Now, in this, the incentive would be given once you are about to manufacture, once you are able to manufacture, and once you are able to provide that in the market. But because of the technology barriers, the companies have been unable to do so. That means the incentive has not been disbursed. Now, while setting up of this entire scheme also, capacity goal 50 gigawatt hour, now mandatory investment was set up around 225 crores per gigawatt hour. That meant only large industries could participate. The reasoning behind that was that some of the frivolous participants that you have, the small sector units who don't have that capacity, they should not be participating or running in the race of incentive, and it should be focused. But what it has resulted in, while you have groups like Hyundai Global, etc., which have participated, some of the local experts for in the sector, for example, Exide Industries, Amara Raja, they have been excluded. And that is because of the huge amount of ask. Now, these companies were also advised and asked to ensure 25% of the manufacturing was local within 2 years, and 60% of the manufacturing would be local in the next 5 years. Timeline: 2 years of gestation followed by 5 years of performance incentive. Nobody has got that incentive. And current status: while 40 gigawatt hour was allocated, right, about 1.4 gigawatt hour of capacity has been commissioned, prompting plans to reallocate or auction the remaining capacity, because the companies clearly, like Reliance Industries, they have not been able to fill the gap. So this basically exposes a major technological gap in our manufacturing sector, which has the potential to impact our renewable sector, our energy transition, and also adoption of electrical mobility. So those are the challenges associated. For your prelims exam, you should be aware of the ACCPLI scheme. For your mains examination, this is in the larger spectrum of why we need to diversify and why we need to develop our own strategic research. Then, diversify your fish basket. Union government advises the states. Now, US again basically has imposed a lot of tariffs on India, but US was a larger market for India's fishing sector. And mind you, in our entire basket of agricultural setup, fishing sector was one of those which has been producing substantial amount of growth for the past decade now. It has been outpacing, the growth rate has been outpacing the crop growth rate or the crop production as well. While the crop production growth rate hovers around 3%, 4%, etc., in the case of the fishing sector, the growth rate, and even in the poultry sector for that matter, is roughly between 8 to 12%, which means many of the farmers, they are getting that income diversification. At the same time, they are also able to ensure a larger amount of money. Now, there is certain problem and a bottleneck in this also. Now, in many of our states of the country, the amount of fish production is restricted to certain species. For example, you still have large production of rohu and katla. Now, these are freshwater species whose international demand is very less. So that is where the government is urging the states to diversify into various different other breeds like tilapia, for example. Okay, tilapia, then scampi, into these other areas as well. The government also wants and is urging the farmers and the states to promote multiple species so that you have some amount of genetic diversification in the ponds as well, where in the same pond you can grow multiple larger number of species. So per pond, the output will be higher, the earning will be higher, and also resilience against diseases. For example, in 2006, 2007, you had a disease which was known as the white spot syndrome, that any of you who has an aquarium at house would also be aware of this white spot syndrome. So this white spot syndrome impacted the various different black tiger shrimp that we had. Black tiger shrimp. And that reduced our export and earning for multiple farmers across the states. So that is where, if you diversify your products, then you don't lose all the income in case one of the species suffers from a disease. India has also been trying to develop the indigenous varieties. For example, you have the Indian white prawn, and giant tiger prawn. Giant tiger prawn, in order to ensure exports. Okay. You have certain species, for example, Kerala's Karimeen, or what is also known as pearl spot. Now, these have a great international demand. They grow in brackish waters, right? Slightly saline, slightly fresh. Now, these are being introduced in regions of Punjab. Why? In Punjab, the groundwater is saline. So, if that is successful, that will provide the farmers an additional source of income as well. Because, mind you, seafood and these exports of the blue economy overall has the potential to uplift our agricultural income, because the demand when it comes to European Union, when it comes to the developed market for that seafood, is extraordinarily high. This is where India has been stealing a march as compared to our East Asian neighbors. That is where a lot of various defaming campaigns have been initiated by countries like Thailand, Cambodia, etc., who have been alleging, for example, that the Andhra fishes and the Andhra shrimps are of poor quality, they are not clean enough, and so on. So that is what the government has advised, that maintain hygienic standards, global practices, and then rest of the things, the exports, etc., will be guaranteed. So that is what India can do for the fisheries in the domestic sector. Now, President Murmu has inaugurated Granth Kutir in Rashtrapati Bhavan. Now, what is this Granth Kutir about to be? So basically, it showcases India's rich cultural diversity out there. Now, it is a library and archival space with a rich collection of manuscripts and books in 11 classical languages of India: Tamil, Kannada, Sanskrit, Marathi, Malayalam, Odia, Pali, Prakrit, and also Assamese. So, and Bengali as well. So, in these particular languages, the manuscripts and the books that is present. So, that is going to be a kind of an archive of sorts. So, you should be aware what is this Granth Kutir. It has been established at Rashtrapati Bhavan. Collection of 2,300 books and 50 manuscripts. Okay. Now, that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion was helpful. Again, humble apologies for the delay, but because we didn't want you to suffer and we didn't want the CNA to or the newspaper analysis to be cancelled, that is why, despite being delayed, we have brought this for you. So if you have liked this particular content, put that in the comment section, and don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.